Jerome, the man who wrote the first version of the Bible, is a church father and doctor of the church, and one of the greatest theologians in church history. His influence was immense. People reading the Bible even today are still influenced by Jerome's translation 1700 years ago. The church had come through 3 centuries of persecution and internal division. There had been intense discussion in the past about the Trinity and the nature of Christ. However, many of these big issues had been settled by the 4th century, but there was also a lot of localized disputes, sometimes between priests and their bishops. Some of these disputes were actually caused by inaccuracies and inconsistencies within early versions of the 4 Gospels. So by the late 4th century, the 370s, 380s, the Pope Damasus realized that it was essential to have a single set of Gospels that was authoritative and also had the official approval of the Church. At this time, Jerome was in his mid-30s. He was recognized as the greatest Bible scholar around. And in 382, he was actually appointed to be the Pope's secretary and also was given the task of writing up a standardized version of the 4 Gospels. Jerome was actually the greatest church scholar of his age. He was actually a contemporary of Augustine's also. Augustine was born actually 7 years later in 354, and Jerome's life, like Augustine's, was also changed in a moment of great spiritual awakening. He had come from a very well-off family in modern-day Croatia, and he went to Rome as a young teenager. He was only 12 or 13 years of age, and he became a brilliant scholar in the classics and also in scripture. However, at the age of 27, his life took a different path following a powerful dream where he appeared to be accused on Judgment Day of following philosophy more so than scripture. This dream had a huge impact on his life. In fact, it became a turning point in Jerome's life. He decided to become a hermit, living in the desert, following a life of prayer, of fasting, of study. And while in the desert, he also met a brilliant Jewish scholar who taught him Hebrew. This has a major influence on Jerome's later life. Now, most of the original Bible was actually written in Hebrew, and Jerome was later able to translate the Bible directly from Hebrew to Latin, rather than first translating it into Greek, which had been the traditional custom within the Christian tradition. Jerome actually argued fiercely with Augustine and with many other scholars as well in relation to this matter. He believed that actually using Greek as an intermediary language was unnecessary and had actually contributed to a lot of the errors of the past. So by the year 382, Pope Damasus had read much of Jerome's work, and he had come to the similar conclusion to Jerome, even though Jerome was 40 years younger than him or so. But he did actually believe in this whole idea of the accuracy of translating directly from Hebrew across to Latin. And so he gave Jerome this huge task of the creation of a standardized, authorized version of the 4 Gospels. However, when the Pope died 2 years later in 384, Jerome had been his secretary and also one of his closest advisors for the previous couple of years. The Pope wanted a standardized Latin version of the Gospels for the Western Church. However, Jerome was quite critical of clergy around Rome, and he created many enemies during that couple of years with his blunt and direct manner. There were actually many jealous scholars also, and clergy who turned on Jerome when he no longer had the protection of the Pope. Within a few months of the Pope's death in December 384, Jerome left Rome, and because of this critical hostility among the Roman clergy. So he left in early 385 and he never returned to Rome again. He travelled to the Holy Land, eventually settling close to Bethlehem, where he founded a monastery with the help of a rich Roman widow. So the papal sponsorship of the translation of the Bible effectively ended with the Pope's death. However, Jerome was such a brilliant scholar, and he continued to work independently in the Holy Land for the next 3 decades. He corresponded with many scholars and theologians during this period, including the great Augustine. Actually, 20 of the letters between these 2 great theologians survive to this day. And freed from the restrictions of Rome, he expanded his project beyond the original idea that the Pope asked him to do, which was to translate just the 4 Gospels. He decided to translate the entire Old Testament directly from Hebrew. some disagreement in regard to this matter between himself and Augustine. However, he wrote extensive notes explaining his translation choices. Therefore, what began as a papal commission became Jerome's life's work in the end. He produced one great, complete Latin Bible known as the Vulgate. And this actually shaped Western Christianity for over 1,000 years. So his work is so accurate and precise that it became accepted as the standard Bible by the Western Church. So what actually was a major setback in Rome, the death of the Pope in 384, became a second major turning point in Jerome's life, and this in turn led to the creation of the Vulgate, the most influential Bible in church history. So this is the story of Jerome. He was, of course, one of the top 8 in terms of church fathers. He was definitely one of the greatest theologians of the entire church history. And he was also, of course, doctor of the church. He was also declared a saint about 1,000 years later. So if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel. I intend to make other videos of similar nature over the next few weeks. And I found this particular video, I must say, very interesting in that Jerome spent 35, 40 years actually very much isolated, very much in his own and around Bethlehem, writing most of the scripts. Of course, he had contacts, but also the other great theologians of the time, especially Augustine. I found it very interesting to realize that there's 20 letters in the Vatican which continue to exist today between these two great church fathers. So that was a very interesting aspect of the research I done. I found out that. So he was born at a very interesting time in terms of church history. He was born in 247, so he was at the stage in his life where he met the Pope in 382. He was 35 years of age at that time. He had already had a very strong reputation as a great writer, as a great Bible scholar, and a great knowledge of Hebrew. And it was that knowledge of Hebrew that he learned from a great Jewish scholar in the desert that he actually brought to Rome with him, and that's what impressed the Pope, and that's why he was given the great task of taking on the actual translation of the 4 Gospels directly from Hebrew to Latin. So he also, of course, spent decades of his life after he fell out with the senior clergy in Rome. He left, went to the Holy Land, and spent the last 30 years of his life, more than 30 years of his life, actually writing the remainder of the Bible. So that's why he's regarded as, of course, the great Bible scholar, the person who influenced not just his own generation, but every generation of theologians. So thank you very much for watching for today. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel. I intend to make other videos like this in the future. So this is End Events, and goodbye for now.